All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into some feelings that can be a bit unnerving, a bit unsettling, a bit difficult to even describe sometimes. You know those moments where you feel disconnected from yourself or like the world around you just seems off somehow?
Yeah, exactly. It's like those times when you look in the mirror and you're like, is that really me? Or you're walking down the street and everything seems, I don't know, kind of fake or dreamlike.
Yeah, yeah. And that's exactly what we're exploring today, these experiences called depersonalization and derealization. We actually have a really interesting German text that we're using as a springboard, and it dives deep into these feelings and busts some common myths about them.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. I mean, for anyone who's not totally familiar, depersonalization is that feeling of being detached from yourself, your body, your thoughts, your emotions, like you're just watching yourself from the outside.
Right, like you're an observer instead of the participant in your own life.
Exactly. And then derealization is that feeling like the world around you is unreal, like maybe it's foggy, distant, distorted, just not quite right.
Yeah, like being in a movie or a dream.
Yeah,
And it can be really disorienting, right?
totally. So, our goal today is to really clarify what these experiences are, look at some of the common misconceptions about them, and hopefully provide some insights for anyone who might be struggling with them.
Awesome. So, myth number one that this German text tackles is the idea that depersonalization and derealization are super rare, like something that hardly anyone ever experiences.
And that's just plain wrong, according to the text. It actually says that most people will experience brief phases of either depersonalization or derealization at some point in their lives.
Really? That's surprising. So, we're not talking about some super obscure mental condition here.
Nope, not at all. Think about it. Haven't you ever been so tired, like completely exhausted, where you just felt kind of spaced out and disconnected? Or maybe you've been really sick or stressed out and things just seemed a little off?
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, like after pulling an all-nighter or something.
Exactly. Or think about those times when you've been really absorbed in a task, like hypo-focused, and then you kind of snap out of it. And for a moment, it's like you're not quite sure where you are or what you're doing. Those could be fleeting moments of depersonalization or derealization.
Huh. I never thought of it that way.
Mm.
So these experiences might be more common than we realize.
Yeah, definitely. And the text even gives us a statistic around 2% of the total population actually experiences recurring or persistent feelings of unreality or detachment.
2%, that's actually more significant than I would have guessed.
Right. And to put that into perspective, the text compares it to the prevalence of anorexia, which is also around 2%.
Wow, that's a really interesting comparison. I mean, we hear about anorexia, we know it's a serious condition, but we rarely hear about depersonalization and derealization, even though they seem to affect a similar number of people.
Exactly. And that brings us to the next point. Why don't we talk about these experiences more? Why do people who go through this often feel so alone and isolated?
Yeah, that's a good question. If it's so common, why the silence around it?
Well, the text suggests that part of the reason is that there's still a huge stigma around mental health in general. People might be afraid to talk about these feelings because they're worried about being judged or labeled as crazy.
Right, because these experiences can be pretty strange and hard to explain.
Totally. And then on top of that, you have the added layer of feeling like you're losing your mind, which can be terrifying.
Yeah, I can imagine. So the lack of open discussion just kind of perpetuates this cycle of shame and isolation.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to talk about these things, to normalize these experiences and let people know they're not alone.
Okay, let's move on to another myth that the text tackles. The idea that depersonalization and derealization always stem from some severe trauma in a person's past. Like if you're experiencing this, it must be because something really bad happened to you.
Yeah, that's a common assumption, and it's not entirely unfounded. The text does acknowledge that in some cases, particularly with chronic depersonalization and derealization, trauma can play a role.
Okay, so there is a connection there sometimes.
Yeah, but the text is careful to point out that it's not as simple as saying trauma equals depersonalization or derealization. What it emphasizes is that in those cases where trauma is involved, these feelings of detachment or unreality often arise during the traumatic event itself or during flashbacks to that event.
So it's more like a direct response to the trauma in that moment, a way of coping.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. But the key takeaway here is that in the vast majority of cases where people experience these feelings, there's no identifiable severe trauma in their past.
Okay, so it's not a given. The causes can be a lot more complex and varied.
Yeah, exactly. The text suggests that other factors like anxiety, stress, sleep deprivation Even certain medications can trigger these experiences.
Right, so it's not always about digging into some deep, dark past trauma.
And that's important to remember because sometimes people can get really stuck on this idea that they must have repressed some horrible memory, and they spend years in therapy trying to uncover something that's not even there.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's important to keep an open mind and consider all the possibilities. Okay, let's move on to a more sensitive topic, drug use. There's a lot of stigma around this, and the myth is that if drug use triggered your depersonalization or derealization, then it's your fault.
Ugh, yeah, that's a really damaging myth. And the text addresses it head on. It actually states that around 30% of people with chronic feelings of unreality or detachment report that drug use was a trigger for them.
30%, that's a pretty significant chunk. So it definitely is a factor for some people.
But the text is very clear that those individuals are not to blame. It emphasizes that the reasons why some people experience lasting effects from drug use while others don't are complex and multifaceted.
So it's not just as simple as drugs are bad, stay away from them and you'll be fine.
No, not at all. It has to do with individual vulnerabilities, genetics, pre-existing mental health conditions, the specific substance use, the dose, the setting, all kinds of things.
It's like a perfect storm of factors that can lead to these long-term effects.
Right, and blaming someone who's going through this only adds to their suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's tackle another big one. The myth that once you experience depersonalization and derealization, it never goes away, it's a permanent state. That's a pretty bleak outlook.
Yeah, that one can be really disheartening. But the good news is the text completely disagrees. It states clearly that even long-lasting depersonalization and derealization can subside.
Oh, that's a relief to hear. So it's not a life sentence?
Nope, not at all. However, the text does add a caveat. It says that in most cases, these feelings don't just magically disappear on their own. It usually requires active effort and engagement from the person experiencing them.
Okay, so it takes work, but there's hope for recovery.
Exactly. And that's a really important message because it can give people a sense of agency and empowerment. They're not just passive victims of their condition, they can actively participate in their healing process.
So what does that active engagement look like? Are there specific treatments for depersonalization and derealization?
That's a great question, and it brings us to another myth, the idea that there are no medications for these conditions.
I've heard that before. Is it true?
Well, it's partly true. The text does say that there are currently no medications that have been specifically approved to treat depersonalization or derealization directly.
Okay, so there's no magic pill you can take and poof, it's gone.
Right. But that doesn't mean medication can't be helpful at all. The text talks about the concept of off-label use, which means using a medication that's approved for one condition to treat a different condition.
Or are there medications that are commonly used off-label for depersonalization and derealization?
Yeah, there are. For example, some antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications have been found to be helpful in managing the symptoms, particularly when they're related to underlying anxiety or depression.
So while there's no cure-all, medication can still play a role in treatment for some people.
Definitely. And it's always important to work with a qualified mental health professional to figure out the best course of treatment for your individual needs.
Absolutely. Okay, let's get into a really heavy one now. The myth that life with depersonalization or derealization is meaningless, that there's no point in even trying to live a fulfilling life if you're experiencing these feelings.
Yeah, that's a really tough one, and I can see how someone might feel that way when they're struggling with these intense experiences of detachment and unreality. It can feel like your whole world has been turned upside down, like nothing matters anymore.
Like you've lost your connection to everything that used to give your life meaning.
But the text strongly refutes this myth. It emphasizes that even while experiencing these feelings, it is absolutely possible to find meaning and purpose in life. It might take some adjusting, some searching, some experimenting, but it's definitely not impossible.
So it's about finding a new way to connect to yourself and the world around you, even with these challenges present.
Exactly. The text talks about the importance of focusing on the things that you can control, even if you can't control the depersonalization or derealization itself. Maybe it's about finding joy in small things, connecting with loved ones, pursuing creative outlets, or engaging in activities that make you feel grounded and present.
It's about shifting your focus from what you've lost to what you still have and what you can still create.
And it's about remembering that your worth as a human being is not defined by these feelings. You are still valuable, you still have potential, and you still deserve a fulfilling life.
That's such a powerful message. It's about reclaiming your agency and your right to happiness. Okay, let's look at another myth that can prevent people from seeking help. The belief that psychotherapy is ineffective against depersonalization and derealization.
The text debunks this myth as well. It clearly states that various forms of psychotherapy can be very effective in treating these conditions. However, it does emphasize that finding the right therapist is crucial.
Right, because not all therapists are created equal.
Definitely. The text stresses the importance of finding a therapist who has specific knowledge and experience in treating depersonalization and derealization. You want someone who understands these experiences, who can validate your struggles, and who can tailor the therapy to your individual needs.
And what kinds of therapy are typically used for these conditions?
There are a few different approaches that can be helpful. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is often used to help people identify and change negative thought patterns and behaviors that contribute to their symptoms.
So it's about recognizing those thoughts that are making the depersonalization or derealization worse and learning to challenge and reframe them.
Exactly. Another approach that can be beneficial is mindfulness-based therapy, which focuses on cultivating present moment awareness and acceptance. This can be really helpful in managing the anxiety and fear that often accompany these experiences.
And grounding techniques are often part of that, right? Like
Yeah.
focusing on your senses to bring you back to the present moment.
Yeah, exactly. It's about having tools to help you feel more anchored in your body and in the world when those feelings of detachment start to creep in.
So while therapy can't necessarily make the depersonalization or derealization go away completely, it can give you ways to manage it and live a more fulfilling life despite it.
That's the goal, yeah. And the text emphasizes that therapy takes time and effort. It's not a quick fix. But with patience and commitment, it can lead to significant improvement.
Okay, the last myth we're going to debunk today is the idea that besides psychotherapy, there's absolutely nothing you can do to help yourself if you're experiencing depersonalization or derealization.
The text firmly disagrees with this. It reminds us that we are not powerless in the face of these challenges. There are things we can do to support our own well-being, even alongside therapy, or if therapy isn't an option right now.
So what are some of those things? What can people do to help themselves?
Well, the text highlights the importance of addressing any underlying factors that might be contributing to the symptoms. For example, if you're struggling with anxiety or depression, it's important to seek treatment for those conditions. If you're not getting enough sleep or if you're using substances that might be triggering your symptoms, it's important to make changes in those areas.
So it's about taking a holistic approach to your health, both mental and physical.
Exactly. And the text also emphasizes the importance of self-care. This can include things like eating a healthy diet, exercising regularly, getting enough sleep, practicing relaxation techniques, and spending time in nature.
It's about nourishing your body and mind and giving yourself the resources you need to cope with stress and challenges.
Right. And it's also about connecting with others. Social isolation can make these feelings of detachment and unreality much worse, so it's important to reach out to friends, family, or support groups.
So even though depersonalization and derealization can make you feel incredibly alone, it's crucial to remember that you're not alone in this. There are people who understand, there are resources available, and there is hope for recovery.
And that's really the takeaway message here. Knowledge is power. Understanding what these experiences are, what causes them, and what you can do about them can make a huge difference in how you cope and how you move forward.
Absolutely. All right, so to wrap things up, I want to leave you with this thought. We've learned today that depersonalization and derealization are more common than we might think. They have diverse causes, and they are not necessarily permanent conditions. So what can we do to raise awareness about these experiences and reduce the stigma that surrounds them? How can we create a more supportive and understanding environment for people who are struggling?
It starts with talking about it, just like we're doing here today. The more we share our experiences, the more we normalize these feelings and the less power they have over us.
Exactly. It's about breaking the silence and letting people know they're not alone. So I encourage you to share this information with anyone who might benefit from it. Let's start a conversation, let's educate ourselves, and let's create a world where mental health challenges are met with compassion and understanding. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.